Now, welcome to wasmCloud Wednesday for November the 10th. As usual, we'd love to get started with the demo, and we'll hand off to Brooks.
Hey, Liam, would you like to give me some screen sharing permission? I tried to ask before you started, but it
one of these days we're going to.
It wouldn't be wasmCloud Wednesday without the screen sharing fiasco.
One of these days we're going to solve this problem with wasmCloud. We'll write an actor to take care of this problem.
That'd be nice. We get our own video conferencing software and everything too. That'd be cool. All right, everyone. Well, happy to start the day out today with the demo. I'm going to be showing off two things that have made their way into the wasmCloud host process and is being proposed right now for Wash, which is the host config and Wash context. So to start us off, I'm just gonna start a NAT server, start a wasmCloud host, and talk about what's different about it. So as you've seen probably a few times before, I'm going to start out a NAT server with Jetstream enabled. This is just going to listen on localhost for port 4222, no authentication or anything. So if we come over to this other terminal window where I have the latest stuff pulled down from the wasmCloud host, and I run mix to launch the host, we'll get a good amount of logging here. The cluster signer is being generated because it's the first time I'm launching a host. We're connecting to NATs locally, etc. And so for this step, we're just launching the host with all defaults. Like we're going to try to connect to NATs localhost for providers and remote procedure calls and for the control interface. And everything by default will work okay. Now I'm going to kill this real quick just because I want to show you the what we've added, which is the host config. Now there's, I don't know, 17 to 20 different variables that you can use to configure a wasmCloud host at startup. And previously you'd have to do that with environment variables. If we take a look at what this host config JSON is, this is auto-generated using all of our quote unquote like reasonable defaults that we use. So like connecting to NATs locally, we auto-generate a cluster key and cluster seed for you so that you can stitch together multiple wasmCloud hosts and give like default lattice prefixes, things like that. This is automatically written. If you use environment variables, it overrides the values in this host config. But the net result of this is that if I launch another host immediately, it's going to read that configuration file and launch the host with those settings. So I can launch this host, I can launch another host on my local, and it would automatically be connected to the same lattice. And from the Wash context, if we run wash cuddle get hosts, then we'll automatically pick up that host. And if we type in help here, we can see this is for pretty simple reason. The wash control, wash cuddle attempts to connect to NATs at localhost 4222 with no authentication or anything. So our defaults are the same from the host config to wash. Now, where you could run into some friction previously is when you start to change these settings. You'd have to export environment variables and change all the command line arguments that you're providing for wash. But I'd like to show you how this is a little bit different now. And this starts at the NATs level. So to show off this example, I want to configure NATs with some authentication. Probably one of the easiest ways we can do this is with an in-key public-private key pair, which we've talked a little bit about NATs authentication before. I'm not going to go 100% into it today, but what I do want to say is like a big benefit of the in-key authentication is that the server just needs to know the public key. So I'm running this on my machine, but if it's somewhere else, that server doesn't need to have any private keys stored on it. So we're going to go ahead and set that up with NATs. What you can do is you can supply NATs with like an auth configuration and just a configuration file. And you just provide it the public key side of a user in key. And we can actually generate that with Wash. If we do wash key gen user, we get the public key and the seed private key. So I'm going to take this public key, give it to NATs, and just replace the question mark that I had. So pretty much when you connect to NATs that's launched with this configuration, you have to have a corresponding private key to this public key. And then I'll copy the seed key because we're going to use it in a second. So I'm going to do the same thing, launch my NAT server with Jetstream. I'm going to instead use this, I'm going to give it a configuration file, this user auth, and then just for fun, I'm going to go ahead and configure a couple other things to show you some different things we can change. So I'm going to listen on 127.0.0.2, and I'm going to use the port 4333. So if we launch this NAT server, you can see we're using that configuration file, Jetstream, and we're listening on, instead of 4 zeros and 4222, it's 127, blah, 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 blah. This is basically just kind of simulating like if you were doing this on a server with a different IP. So now, if I go back to run my wasmCloud host, we're going to try to connect on localhost 4222. We're not going to have any authentication, so it's not going to work. But with this host config, we can actually fairly easily fix that. So in here, this is a big one-line JSON string, but it's not going to be too hard to modify. So I'm just going to like group override where we're connecting to 127.0.0.1. Instead, I'll change it to 127.0.0.2. That's going to be for the control interface, the provider, remote procedure call host, and the remote procedure call host. And then I'm also going to change the default that we have for port 4222 to 4333. And this would be prettier if I opened in VS Code and like beautified it a little bit, but I just kind of wanted to get through this part. And then the last thing that we need to do is supply the NATs user seed for the control interface, providers, and for, oh, that's not it. For providers and for the RPC host. So I'm going to paste this user seed in. I guess I could always do this with an environment variable too, but now we've modified this to connect to our new NAT host. So if we run our host process now, we're going to connect to NAT a little differently. Different host with using an in-key seed on a different port. And if I were to quit out of this host, launch it again, or if I were to launch another host, it would automatically connect. So now, you know, the host configuration makes this a little bit easier to change your NAT settings. Now, if we go to the wash side of things, and we were to run like wash cutoff get hosts, we need to like completely reconfigure this in order to connect to our new NATs cluster with the, oh, that's weird. We got a response there. I thought that okay, so the default is localhost 4222, but we actually have a new feature in Wash where this required no configuration changes at all. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Wash context. So this is a new command in Wash that's proposed. I have it in a PR right now that includes a couple of different things. First thing is an automatically managed host config context. If we list our context, we can see that we have one called host config. And if we take a look at this context, we can see that it has our cluster seed for signing invocations, our like user seed for connecting the NATs, and the different different RPC hosts. It's automatically sourced from our host config that we use to launch the host. So this one is automatically created and updated anytime you issue like a control interface command or a call command. So, I mean, we can do things like wash control start actor. We can do our good old readily available echo actor for this, something like that. And the net benefit of this is that Wash is always configured immediately to connect to the same infrastructure that the same NATs infrastructure that your host is. So as soon as you edit the host configuration and you launch a new host, Wash is configured to do the same thing. So this doesn't cover all use cases. You may be administering like a remote NAT or wasmCloud cluster. You might be, I don't know, you might be interacting like read-only with like a prod wasmCloud host or something for all you people running wasmCloud in production. And if you want to actually manage that, you can create context on your own. So we have a new command, and we have a nice interactive flag that will prompt you for everything you need for a context. So I can call it something like community demo. If we want to input a cluster seed for assigning invocations or changing different parameters for our control interface connection, our PC connection, things like that. If you just enter all the way through, it'll give you the default context. As I showed you a little earlier, we can also edit these contexts, which you can provide a text editor to use, but we can edit or look at that community demo context that I just created. And then of course we can delete them and set different contexts for our default if we want to use those for various operations in Wash. So in the end, just to wrap up the demo and bring it all home, we have two big benefits here. The host configs make it a lot easier to provide like an easy way to configure a wasmCloud host, what you would previously have to do with a ton of different environment variables. And contexts make it so that you automatically connect to your local wasmCloud host without any configuration changes. And then you can manage additional context from here on out if you have a more complex use case. All right, that's all I got. Didn't have anything fancy about showing off hosts, but happy to take any questions about host configs, host Wash contexts, or like how I configure NATs for authentication, anything like that.
This is awesome, Brooks. I love the part of the video where your own feature surprised you. You're like, wait a minute, what's going on? You're like, oh, wait a minute, that's my feature, it's working.
Yeah, hopefully that was convincing. Oh no, it worked.
Part of the plan. Well, this is great. So what's the timeline you think for getting feedback on this to get it merged in?
You know, there's a couple of I feel like there's a couple of assumptions and questions that people have. I kind of coded a lot of this and put it up for a PR, and there's you know, the interaction between a host config and a wasmCloud context is something that I've been kind of answering questions for in our Slack. So I think as soon as I can clear up that interaction for everybody, it's ready for review in Wash. So by the end of this week, it should be in, I would say.
Okay, that's awesome. Any other questions for Brooks? All right, Steve, I think we're going to pass over to you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Stuart had a question.
I was just wondering whether you can execute Wash commands across multiple contexts by specifying context on the command line.
Yep, you absolutely can.
Amazing.
So every control interface or the call command has a context option now, which you can specify a context to use. If you don't specify one, it'll use whichever one you have set as a default, which you can see by listing.
Amazing. Well done. It's great.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Great. Well, I guess there's no more questions. I think we're going to pass it over to Steve for a quick glimpse at the roadmap for wasmCloud. Steve, it's all you.
Great. Here we go. Okay, so here's my Slack. I'm just posting onto the Slack general channel now. Some exciting things on our roadmap. Brooks just showed the new Wash context feature, which isn't even in here. It's moving so fast. So Bindle server, you might have seen there's an open ticket for that, and that'll be a more efficient way to download capability providers because it's got links to download just the binary that you need, and not all of them. We'll also be developing some additional capability providers, and one of the keys is, one of the most important ones is blob interface with AWS S3 backend. We're also going to start work on what we call a super tiny runtime for small devices and embedded use. Bunch of improvements to the CI/CD pipeline, including the Apple M1 support and more efficient builds overall. Also on the JavaScript wasmCloud host, it does run in the browser today. There's a few more things we want to do to get it to work well on Node.js, and updating the build to the ES standard, and some washboard cleanup. So happy to go into detail on these if you're interested. And I'd also say we're hiring, looking for good developers, front end and back end. So we'll be posting some new links on Cosmonic soon, but the wasmCloud support is really important to what we're doing, and we're looking for some people who like working on it and want to help us move forward better. So that's my roadmap update.
Stuart, any questions, or Jordan, any questions on what we've got kind of laid out on the roadmap here? Any things that you guys would want to see on here?
No, that looks great. I was wondering about how far the lattice controller is coming on. I don't know. I haven't really been watching it recently, but.
So I've extracted some core lattice observer logic into an Elixir application that can be used from any other Elixir application. So in short, I have an OTP supervision tree that's responsible for observing any given lattice.
Nice.
And so that's being used. I've got that working to observe lattices in some sample code. And so once I get a free moment of time somewhere, I'm going to go back out into the lattice controller and upgrade the lattice controller so it uses this new observation supervision tree.
Nice.
And so once the lattice controller is able to observe using that library, then we'll use the functions that are already in it to come up with the recommendations for the autonomous agent part. And so then the next step after that is just in converting those recommendations into commands sent out on the lattice controller for management. So there's still a lot of work to do yet, but you know, I can see the tunnel from here. I can't see the light at the end of it, but I can see the tunnel.
Nice. Awesome, thank you.
Quick question, only because we polled the community, is there any way we can get on the roadmap, the determination on the additional language support and maybe a timeline of how far out that may be coming?
Yeah, Jordan, let me jump on that one real fast. We've got a bunch of enterprise customers that are using wasmCloud that we're kind of talking through. And what I think will happen here is that those engagements will drive the prioritization of that work. So let me just leave it at that and say I agree with you that there's more things to show up on this list, but we're really trying to figure out, you know, which customer priorities really need to go to the top of the list. I would say this is the start of what the roadmap looks like, and you know, some of the things that we'd additionally, you know, you and I have discussed. You know, how can we, you know, should we be posting a, you know, blog and posting videos to the wasmcloud.com site or wasmcloud.dev site, you know, weekly and things like that. You know, those are other things that I think that there's a lot of other things that should be on here as well. Did that help, Jordan?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. What else? Any other feedback on the list here? I think we've got one other agenda item on today after that. Okay, well, thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate you pulling that together and grooming that out. We've spent a lot of time the last few weeks as a team together, just trying to figure out what our priorities are and getting them lined up and make sure that they line up with all the folks that are using wasmCloud. So let's maybe turn back to Brooks. Brooks, you were going to talk about some of the good first issues that you wanted to highlight today for people that wanted to jump in.
Yes, I do. And I'm going to monopolize as much time of this meeting as I can. So I kind of talked about it last week. I was calling it the contributor call out, I think, or the community call out. I really like the idea of having this section in our meetings where we do like a contributor call to action. And over the last weekend, I was able to go through some of our issues across our repositories and find some that were relatively scoped out. We can mark them as good first issue, and somebody who's looking to contribute for the first time can jump in and get their hands on contributing and possibly get a t-shirt in exchange for their first contribution. So I've got three. Let's see, you all should be able to see my Chrome. Yeah, I've got three issues that I want to put on deck for this week, and I'll post these in Slack too, so that if anybody misses it or you catch the YouTube video, you can go and work on them. First one is performing the health checks for actors and providers immediately. This is in the wasmCloud OTP repo. So this is going to involve writing some Elixir. Part of the goal of what we wanted to do with using Elixir and using Rust is to increase the language spread that we had. And if you have not done any development in Elixir yet, you know, I added a couple of documentation links here, and we're happy to kind of talk through this if you're looking to contribute. So this one, basically, when you start an actor, we tell it to send a health check in 30 seconds. It'd be high impact for us, relatively low effort if you can make the actor do a health check right away, which kind of documented with these two like Elixir functions. The second one is in the WASH repository. Thank you, Jordan, for filing this. Basically, when we wrote the GitHub actions for WASH, we were using some outdated stanzas, things like checkout v1 and I don't know, create a release with this action that's now like deprecated and not maintained. You know, it all still works okay, but we're looking to upgrade those. If anybody's poked at GitHub Actions before, it should be a fairly quick thing to do, and you can take inspiration from some of our other actions too. And the last one, WASH, in the WASH repository, this is one that I feel like would have a really big impact on us, is creating parity with our environment variables. So in WASH, we have plenty of environment variables for specifying things like the RPC host, RPC port, and we have similar environment variables in wasmCloud, you know, wasmCloud RPC port and host. And if we could merge this list together and just make WASH use all the same environment variables, then it would be a lot easier to connect to other wasmCloud hosts. So these three issues, again, I'll put them in the Slack. We really tried to scope them out in the issue text so you can get started on it. We also have the help channel in Slack now if you are running into any roadblocks. And yeah, just want to drive and encourage everybody to contribute, especially if you haven't yet. We're definitely always looking for contributors.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And Jordan, do you think when we post this video that we could tweet out a link directly to this part of it, just so that we get Brooks kind of doing the like new contributor intro in case we want to try to put somebody in there?
I was literally going to pop in. I think I'm going to drop a big old screen right on top of this point, fade in. It says contributor hour or something. But yes, to answer your question, yeah, I can tweak whatever you want.
Yeah, well, I trust you. You've got all the creds, man. You know, you've been doing a really great job with it, and I really appreciate what you're doing. I hope you know that that's just as important as everything else that we do. You know, writing the code, organizing. You know, it's all part of making the recipe taste good. You got to have lots of different ingredients, and that's you know, and especially hard one because you have to just be so consistent and timely and respond, quickly to the weekly videos and stuff. And you're doing a really great job, Jordan. Thank you so much for standing up to do that. I think that is what we have on the agenda today. Is there anything else that anyone else wanted to raise just across the, across the board here?
I think just a real quick note is what's it called? The KubeCon NA WASM videos are now public on YouTube. So if you missed any of the talks or anything, you can find them live and public now.
Okay, solid. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I put those on Twitter as well. And I think we will have, there's some awesome talks there that day, including Stuart's talk, which is probably my favorite of the day, which was the, Red Badger helping a large European financial, move to multi-cloud architecture with wasmCloud. Something along those lines. I paraphrased a little bit, but it was phenomenal. I love the enthusiasm and the excitement. And I probably emailed that video to 100 people in the last month. So Stuart, thank you so much for that. Well, if there's nothing else, open floor. We do have some things upcoming soon. reInvent, which we're going to talk about privately as a team afterwards. I hope that we're going to at least host a meetup for wasmCloud folks while we're out there in Las Vegas in a month. And then we've got some planning already underway for Barcelona in 2022 that we'll maybe start talking about over the next few weeks. But if there's nothing else, I hope everybody has a wonderful wasmCloud Wednesday. Oh, Valencia. Is it Valencia? Valencia. Oranges. Have a great week.